In 1970, a bizarre incident occurred in the city of Orlando, USA. A diver suddenly swam to the bottom of the water without warning, as if he had been caught in an evil spirit. You know the water here is at least 200 meters deep, and if you swim in, you will definitely die. Upon learning of the situation, the police quickly launched a search and rescue operation. However, more horrific things followed. A member of the search and rescue team suddenly went crazy in the same strange position, swam towards the abyss with his hands, and disappeared into the endless darkness in an instant. The bodies of the two missing people mysteriously disappeared in the end. People didn't know what had happened. This is the Emerald Sink incident that shocked for a while. Emerald Sink is very different from most caves. Most caves are hidden away from the crowds in the middle of nowhere. The Emerald Sink, on the other hand, is located inside a residential building and is abruptly located in the bustling urban area. The water originates from the underground aquifer, and the water temperature is stable at around 22 degrees Celsius all year round. The water is relatively clear, glowing with emerald green under the refraction of the sun, making it look like a huge emerald when viewed from above. Today, it is no longer open to the public, as if it were deliberately hiding the horrors of the past. In the 70s, the owners of the house rented the place to a diving team to provide them with a training ground. The captain of this diving team is the famous Hal Watts. He was one of the founders of the American Cave Diving Association and was an idol to many young divers. August 13th, 1970 seemed like an ordinary day, but for Hal Watts and 16-year-old Fred Schmidt, it became a nightmare of their lives. Fred was one of the students who studied diving with Hal. Although he was still young, he was one of the few people in the entire city who dove more than 100 meters deep, and he was no worse than experienced divers in terms of diving skills and safety knowledge. In order to continue to improve his diving skills, he joined Hal Watts Diving Club, hoping to become a master diver like Hal. Hal also valued this hardworking and talented student and always gave Fred some exclusive diving experience in addition to training. Hal and Fred entered the Emerald Sink to find a dive vest that had been lost during their previous diving practice here. That diving vest was worth a lot of money, so it was a shame to lose it. Before the dive, Hal and Fred, as usual, carried out a meticulous routine check on the gear. Hal was well aware of the dangers of cave diving, and he explained to Fred in detail the route and precautions of the dive. It had been repeatedly emphasized that no matter what situation they encountered, he must not panic. Hal told Fred that he should follow the established route closely, not deviate from it at will, and inform him immediately if there was any abnormality. As they slowly descended to a certain depth, their surroundings began to grow darker. The originally clear water body seemed to be gradually swallowed up by darkness at this moment. The light was getting weaker and weaker, and the temperature under the water seemed to have dropped by several degrees, which made people shiver. They turned on the diving lights, and the faint light flickered in the darkness, barely illuminating a small area around them. In the dim light, they searched around carefully, hoping to find the missing diving vest. However, they searched for a while but could not find it. Hal knew that if the dive was too long, a short period of decompression would be very cumbersome and could even be life-threatening. So he decided to go back, and Fred agreed, following Hal. That's when the accident happened. As he walked, Fred Schmidt's diving lights suddenly loosened and fell off for some reason. The sight of the lights falling rapidly was particularly dazzling under the dark water. For that moment, the whole world seemed to fall silent, except for the sound of Fred's rapid breathing and heartbeat. Fred panicked instantly, and without the slightest hesitation, he reflexively dived in the direction where the lamp had fallen, trying to retrieve it. When Hal saw this, he was shocked. He never expected Fred to make such a move, and in his opinion, it was really unnecessary to salvage a lamp because Fred could go ashore even without a diving lamp and follow him closely. However, at this time, Fred was only interested in retrieving the lamp and completely ignored Hal. Hal couldn't help but wonder. Fred should understand that the further down the river, the more dangerous it was, and it was obviously not his usual style to dive all the way down in order to chase a dispensable light. Moreover, Fred's eagerness to dive was far faster than he expected, and despite Hal's best efforts to catch up, he was never able to close the distance between him and Fred. In just a few minutes, Fred disappeared from Hal's sight, leaving only a silent dark water. If you count the decompression time required to float, the oxygen of both of them was almost insufficient at this time. If no one rescued him in time, Fred would definitely die. You must know that after a person has made a deep dive, he must do a decompression step in the process of floating. That is, he must float for a certain distance, stop for a while, float again, and stay again, and so on until he floats to the surface. Otherwise, the human body will suffer from decompression sickness, which can cause severe joint pain. In the worst case, he can faint, lose consciousness, and drown underwater. Hal was so anxious, he didn't care that he hadn't decompressed yet, and swam all the way to the surface. As he ascended, he felt his body getting heavier and heavier, and there was a sharp pain in his joints. Immediately afterward, his eyes went dark, and he fainted briefly from decompression sickness. Luckily, after a few seconds, he came to his senses with a strong will and continued to struggle to swim ashore. After going ashore, he didn't even have time to catch his breath, and he quickly called the police. After receiving the report, the police immediately contacted the local rescue team. The local dive rescue team quickly assembled, carrying professional rescue equipment, and planned to search along the route that Hal and Fred entered. Once inside the cave, rescuers carefully searched every nook and cranny with the help of the light of a flashlight. However, the search and rescue operation lasted for 2 days, and they did not even see Fred's shadow. On August 16th, Hal recovered from decompression sickness and joined the search and rescue team. Despite his weak health, the Emerald Sink, after diving to a certain depth, it divides into 2 forks. Hal and 2 other search and rescue team members, Bill and Bud, chose to go to the fork in the road on the right. However, they went close to 100 meters deeper, but they still couldn't see any trace of Fred. Hal and Bud felt a little tired and decided to return first, while Bill decided to continue his exploration. Hal and Bud returned to a depth of 40 meters to take a short break at this location. Suddenly, Bud's body became entangled in a rope. The rope was like a poisonous snake hidden in the darkness, and Bud panicked. His eyes were wide, and his face was full of fear. He struggled desperately to free himself from the rope, and a muffled cry came out of his mouth. Seeing this, Hal hurriedly took out his knife and tried to separate the ropes. However, Bud's body kept rocking back and forth, as if it was being controlled by something, and Hal couldn't cut the rope smoothly. All this is too strange. How could Bud behave in this way even if he was a member of a professional rescue team? He had rich experience and should have a strong psychological quality. How could he panic like this because of a rope? It's all the more strange that he was still struggling while Hal was cutting the rope for him. Was he defending himself against someone else helping him? Hal didn't think much of it. He just wanted to help Bud get out of this situation as soon as possible. After much effort, the rope was finally cut. However, Bud did not stop struggling. He continued to rock back and forth, looking very nervous, and his eyes revealed a kind of madness and fear. Hal next to him decided to take him back with him, but Bud seemed to be a different person and didn't want Hal to touch him at all. He began to punch and kick. His movements were unruly, but the force was amazing. During the violent shaking, his equipment began to loosen, which was extremely dangerous for diving sports, and once the equipment fell off, he would be in an even more dangerous situation. Hal tried to help him stabilize the device, but Bud resisted violently, even trying to remove Hal's oxygen mask. Hal was shocked, and he realized that it might be dangerous to get close to Bud again, so he had to return first without even finishing the decompression measures. And what about Bud at this time? He began to dance with his hands, falling as he danced. His movements were like a manipulated puppet, and he was extremely weird. In the process of falling, Bill, who was ascending, spotted him. Bill's heart tightened, and he hurriedly swam over to help. However, Bud punched and kicked him, even removing Bill's mask and oxygen cylinder. Seeing that something was wrong, Bill hurried away from Bud and put on his gear again. He looked at Bud with a puzzled face, completely unaware of what was wrong with his colleague. Hal then floated ashore, where he was taken to the hospital with decompression sickness. Bill eventually managed to rise without major problems. However, Bud never came up again. This Emerald Sink diving incident caused an uproar in the diving community. Various rumors about the Emerald Sink also spread in diving circles. Some said that the Emerald Sink had mysterious powers that could make people lose their minds. It was also said that it was a cursed place and that those who entered it would suffer misfortune. These rumors, while not backed by any science, made Emerald Sink even more mysterious. So, why did Emerald Sink have such a series of strange things? After analysis by medical experts, it is likely that Fred Schmidt had a heart attack during the dive due to the complexity of the cave environment and the stimulation of the tense atmosphere. He had a history of heart disease, which became fatal in this extreme environment. In the process of rapid diving, the body bears the additional burden caused by the change in water pressure, and the heart cannot withstand such a huge pressure, which leads to tragedy. Due to the suddenness of the incident, he failed to rise in time, and his body sank to the bottom of the cave after losing consciousness. So the dark bottom of the water became his eternal home at the age of 16. Bud's abnormality is most likely due to nitrogen anesthesia. At the depths of cave diving, the solubility of nitrogen in blood and tissues increases as the pressure increases. When nitrogen accumulates in the body to a certain extent, it will have an effect on the nervous system of the diver, and a state similar to drunkenness appears, which is manifested by symptoms such as confusion, emotional instability, and uncontrolled behavior. In this chaotic state of mind, Bud had completely lost control of his movements in the cave and eventually sank to the bottom. Nowadays, no one dares to easily step into this mysterious emerald sink, and they are afraid of becoming the third victim, which also makes the terrifying legend of Emerald Sink continue to spread.